Before we start today's meeting, can I just welcome members of the public and the press to this meeting? And also before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Councillor Caroline Shires on her recent award on behalf of the Council from the Local Government Information Unit, where she was named Champion for Education in her role as convener of the Council's Lifelong Learning Committee. I'm sure you would all agree that's it. Thank you, Councillors. Can I remind Councillors and officers to use microphones and request that those attending the meeting ensure that all mobile phones and other communications devices are in silent mode. Can I also remind you that the meeting will be recorded and be available on YouTube via the Council's website following the meeting. Are there any apologies for today's meeting?
Provost, we have apologies from Councillor James, from Councillor Barnacle and from Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you very much, Scott. Are there any declarations of interest in respect of items on today's agenda? Councillor McDade.
Yes, Provost, I'd like to declare an indirect non-financial interest in item 3.3.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Now, we have 3 notices of motions in terms of Standing Order 39. First one is payment of the real living wage rate. Can I invite Councillors Bailey and McDade to speak to the revised motion that has been circulated? However, prior to Councillor McDade speaking, Councillor Bailey speaking, I've had a notice from leader of the opposition and from the administration that they are actually in favour of, are quite happy to let the motion go through. Is that correct, gentlemen?
It is indeed, Provost, yes.
Yep, I'm happy for the motion to succeed.
So could I, are you all happy for that motion just to go through? Thank you very much. Councillor Barrett, have you something to say?
Sorry, Provost, I was going to raise a question later. I don't know whether Councillor Bailey is still getting to propose his motion or what's happening at the moment. Well,
if everybody's happy with it to go through and we've got the motion in front of us, do we need to go through the process, that's all?
In which case, I'll be very brief, Provost. My only concern about the motion was that in due course, the Scottish Local Government living wage will be up-rated. That rate is always slightly higher than the Living Wage Foundation rate, and just wanted to ensure that when that figure is lighted upon, that the living wage paid to our employees will be upgraded in that respect.
Okay, I think it's Stewart, could you enlighten us on that?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. My understanding is that the motion pertains to the coming financial year only, but that issue you raised will be addressed in the coming financial year. Thank you.
To move it and to second it, so we've got it on record.
Councillor Bailey, would you like to move your motion and McDade to then we'd have it on record, but we won't take any questions. And you move and second.
Thank you, Provost. I'll be brief in light of the fact that we've essentially predetermined this one. I move that Council notes that an increase in the real living wage to £9 an hour was announced by the Living Wage Foundation in early November. This increase takes into account the higher transport costs, private rents and council tax bills that have already hit the pockets of our staff. As an accredited living wage employer, Council would ordinarily pass on the new rate effective 1st of April 2019. Council instead agrees to pay the new £9 an hour real living wage rate effective November 5th, 2018. The cost of doing so will be £15,300 to be funded from the projected underspend on the unfunded pensions budget reported to SPNR on 28th of November 2018. 114 staff members will benefit from this change, plus approximately 140 casual and supply staff. This position will be kept under review in financial years. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor McDade.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I'm very pleased to second this motion today, and with the cross-party support that we've seen across the Chamber, and I'd like to thank the leader of the SNP group and the leader of the administration for their support in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, I'm not a great fan of referenda. They tend to be very divisive. They could almost be described as an opinion poll of how people feel on a given day and time. However, unlike opinion polls, referendums can have serious and long-term consequences. The call for a people's vote has been backed by Prime Ministers, by ex-Prime Ministers and senior representatives of all the major political parties, except, strangely enough, by UKIP. Our Prime Minister Theresa May has struggled violently This impasse can only be freed by handling the decision on the proposed Brexit deal back to the British people. There is nothing to fear by doing this. It is clear there is little appetite for a no-deal Brexit in Parliament, so the choice should be back the deal the Prime Minister has come back with, or B, remain a member of the European Union. I would ask us all to follow the other Scottish councils and add our support to and call for a people's vote. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Provost. In the spirit of the season of goodwill to all, I'm pleased to second this Brexit motion, which I am sure will find favour across the Chamber from those of all parties and of none. I have followed the ever-evolving Brexit news carefully, just in case there was a Christmas miracle in Westminster. But unfortunately, there is still an omnishambles of enormous proportion which threatens the well-being of us all with just 100 days to go. We can all assist in pressing for a rethink in the light of changing circumstances and support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Are there any comments or contributions? Councillor McCall.
I have an amendment.
Okay, have you seconded?
I'm happy to second that, Provost.
Could I believe the amendment? Could I articulate it? Thank you. Thank you, Provost. In the spirit of the season, I'm going to opt for brevity. I would like to put an amendment forward that the Council does not believe that it's the role of local authorities to suggest holding a further referendum on a subject that has already been put to the electorate by any Parliament.
Yeah. Have you any copies?
Got copies here.
Who's got copies? You got copies? Right. Scott's going to distribute some copies to you. don't think it'll take you long to read that one. Councillor Hearn, do you want to?
I'm just happy to second it, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments or contributions to this?
On a point of order, sorry. Forgive me if the recording proves me wrong, but to my recollection, I think Ros may have said something to the extent that that we don't agree with following any further referendums or on any subject. So I just want to clarify that the motion is the amendment is as written on the paper, and that the word any isn't included. I could be wrong about this.
I said any parliament, but I am happy to, it is as written.
Okay. Right, any comments or contributions?
Thank you, Provost. In anticipation, most of my audience are normally asleep at this stage, so if I stumble and stammer, I apologise. I have the greatest sympathy with the motion put forward by Councillors Robertson and Simpson. Quite simply, the situation referred to as Brexit is a mess. It's a burach, to quote Mike Russell, or that might have been Angus Forbes talking about my desk. However, even as a Remainer and a strong believer, as all my colleagues are in this, of the Union, I am not convinced that a second referendum would do anything to help the situation. What would be achieved? What would the question be? To be in or not to be in? That was the question. Hamlet was a tragedy. Brexit is a tragedy. I assume that those in favour of a second referendum believe that the result this time would be different. This is based on the assumption that people did not know what they were voting for, although a recent poll on the 4th of December, What the UK Thinks, refutes this. This assumption may be the case, however, other polls, for what they are worth, reveal a public which is stubbornly divided. And despite a shift towards a slight majority believing that the vote to leave was the wrong decision, the margin is small enough to prevent any certainty as to the outcome of any popular vote. Whatever the result, it seems unlikely to provide a significant majority either way. Let's face it, a narrow victory for Remain, the outcome which most proponents of a second referendum desire, would solve none of the underlying problems that led to the Brexit vote in the first place. Rather, it would provide ammunition to opponents of the EU, and the establishment would be portrayed as having betrayed the Leave voters. Furthermore, a new referendum would pose a number of practical problems. Not least, it would necessitate another Act of Parliament. In 2016, it took 7 months to get this sorted out. And even if there's some shortcutting, there's no way that the process could be done before the 29th of March. This would then require the delaying of implementation of Article 50. To delay Article 50 will require the agreement of all 27 EU members. This probably, but cannot definitely, be taken for granted. Summing up, the anger a second vote would generate amongst Leave voters who would feel immensely cheated would be immense, the anger. It is hard to see how a calm and rational debate would be possible, assuming we've had one. It really is worth emphasising just how profound the division in our countries are. All referenda are divisive. They divide the community, the country and families. Elected politicians are the representatives of the public. It is they who should decide, not, as David Cameron unfortunately did, shirk their responsibilities. I would suggest that we should have no more referenda in our country, ever, and as such, I support the amendment. Thank you.
I would like to say that having seen a generation grow up who have been, let's say, Europeans all of their life, for us, for the older generation, to whisk the rug out from under their feet, I think is is divisive and terrible. They've grown up as Europeans. They can go, they can work in any country in Europe. The people from Europe can come and work here. Why on earth do we want to set ourselves on a pedestal and put ourselves out with the European continent? We've got a completely inclusive Europe at the moment. Why do we want to end that?
Thank you. Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Provost. I'm delighted to see support on this side of the chamber for a unilateral declaration of independence. That's really helpful, I think. I have a certain, getting back to the motion, I have a large degree of sympathy for it. I think any chance that Brexit had of being a success economically has disappeared a long time ago, down to Westminster incompetence. If you'll indulge me, just a couple of brief observations that my country, Scotland, actually voted pretty decisively in favour of remaining in the EU already. So that was good. And I think that, secondly, it is a little bit of shame that the third Willie of Lib Dem Willie of the Biennial doesn't extend the same democratic courtesy to a second Scottish independence referendum. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. Only 2 months ago, I travelled down to London to support a people's vote and to demonstrate alongside members of Perth for EU. I did so more in hope than expectation, but did so because a strong signal needed to be sent to the UK government that they no longer represent the will of the people in pushing for any sort of Brexit, hard, soft, the May deal that nobody wants, or the no deal that does anybody any good. The Prime Minister has buried her head in the sand to avoid hearing the clear message from the 750 marchers in London, and she's kept it there as every EU negotiator and leader tells her that the deal on offer is the best that Europe can do, and nobody can seriously doubt that. The Brexiteers that chickened out of the negotiations now find their chickens have come home to roost. Their lies and false campaign promises have been fully exposed. No £350 million per week for the NHS, no taking back control, no queue of countries lining up to do bigger, better, more beautiful trade deals. Instead, a price of £39 billion to throw away all our political influence in the European Parliament, no seat in the Council of Ministers table, and entry only into any other competent business on the European stage. In the meantime, the value of the pound has plummeted. Essential professionals in our NHS and universities are being siphoned away. Key local economic sectors of tourism, agriculture and the care sector are struggling to recruit and to retain their workforce, and our public services are being drained of skills. Organisations are stockpiling supplies like they're preparing for war. At some stage, Boris is going to appear telling us to dig for victory and dig for Britain. It's clear that the UK government can't control this. Parliament cannot chart a route out of this, and that is why a people's vote in the presence of all the facts and options is what we need and what this council should support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I think it was yourself, yeah.
Thank you, Provost. I've only got a very short point to make. We hear on the news recently with Brexit that immigration is going to be allowed for staff who earn over £30,000 a year. I can inform this council that actually newly qualified pharmacists, essential healthcare professionals do not earn over this amount of money and therefore wouldn't be allowed in the country. It's a complete and utter burrick, as has been said already.
Thank you, Provost. I too will be brief. I noted that Councillor Reid referred to a calm and rational debate. I hope that wasn't what he was referring to when we had the first Brexit referendum, because it certainly, in my opinion, was nothing as that described to me. As the UK government are definitely in stalemate, and facts that have been uncovered since the first referendum back 3 years ago, this justifies the chance for a second people's vote, as far as I'm concerned. And one hopes that now we're 5 years on since the Scottish Indie Ref, and my council colleagues will perhaps agree with me that perhaps in the not too distant future, a second independence referendum would be quite viable. Therefore, I would support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Provost. Even as someone who supports Remain, I can see that another referendum would be hugely divisive. This country needs bringing together with common cause, not a further divisive split. As councillors, we should focus on the impact this will have on our local residents. I applaud the spirit of this motion, but now is the time for us to take practical steps to prepare for whatever chaos this dysfunctional Tory government is about to wreak upon us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Provost. I'll be brief as well. I just really wanted to come back on what Councillor Rubeck said. The Scottish referendum in 2014 elected to remain part of the United Kingdom. We're now in a difficult situation. We rise with her and we fall with her now. And whatever the outcome in the next few months, we need, as one country, to pull together to make whatever the outcome a success. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Ellingworth.
Thank you, Provost. Perth Kinross Council has got lots and lots of different roles in our society. Picking up litter, potholes, a whole range. An amendment that calls for another referendum is not part of our remit. We've got a lot of work to do in this meeting, and can we ask that we quickly move towards a vote?
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. I hesitate to say that the people who have promoted this are naive, but in actual fact, they are. Because quite simply, if they were to get this and there was a change from the rather mess we find ourselves in, it's only going to change the emphasis. And we would be right back where we are. An awful lot of people fighting like rats in a sack. No proper conclusion, no good basis for the Prime Minister to take forward the argument to Europe. You can see why she has the trouble. They must be sitting there laughing and saying, you know, can't they even agree over anything? So I really think we do not want that. We've had enough problems. If the democratic right of the people was offered in the referendum, they made a choice. So I think it should be left there, or we will be ending up like Canada with a never-ending circle of never-endums going round and round and round, and it won't just be the future of Britain, it will be the future of Scotland, because the SNP will just do exactly the same.
Councillor Grant. Apologies.
I'd just like to respond to Councillor Bailey's comment about that we should be concentrating on the residents of Perth Kinross. And that's exactly why this motion's been brought, is because this is going to affect all our residents, our farmers, our fruit farmers, our elderly for home care. And that's why we have to look at it. Not everybody's talking on the large political thing about Scottish independence referendum and the Brexit. This is about the people of our local authority. And the only way that we can protect them from the worst excesses of a hard Brexit is to have a second vote.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, I'm only going to take two more comments after this one.
Thank you, Provost. I will be supporting this motion. Given the shambles we have at Westminster on this issue, a second referendum is the second best option. The first best option, of course, is revocation of Article 50, which we now know is possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Could I just say to Councillors Bailey and Illingworth, this council does have the right to express a view on Brexit and on what is, without any doubt, the single most important issue to face us since the Second World War, and the effects, the impact, if there is no deal on the people of Perth and Kinross, will be substantial and significant. I support this motion. My one reservation is it seems to make out that this is, in fact, the only option. It may yet be in Parliament, who knows what will happen over coming weeks, that a Norway-style arrangement may come into place, perhaps without us even joining EFTA, but we are still in the European Economic Area. And it is vital that we stay in the single market. That does mean freedom of movement. We want migration. It's important for this area, in particular for financial services, for Aviva. And what's good for Aviva is, in my view, is good for Perth. So I do support this motion, and I think we want to demonstrate clearly that our abhorrence at what is happening at Westminster and the real dangers that come over the next few weeks. We have 100 days to go, and the way the Prime Minister is going about it, it will be 80 days to go before we have the next vote in Parliament. It really is a remarkable set of circumstances. I support the motion, as I say, with some reluctance.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Provost.
Deputy Provost, I beg your pardon.
That's okay. Well, this is a defining moment for people to think and put their party political affiliation and affection aside and vote for something that affects every single individual in Perth and Kinross, every single individual in Scotland, and every single individual in the United Kingdom. Somebody said the Europeans were laughing at us. Most of the Europeans I speak to, Provost, are crying. They're crying because they see the folly and the stupidity of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. They see the folly of the economic arguments. They see the folly of peace, prosperity, and people. And these are the three words I've used consistently throughout this debate to justify supporting membership of the EU. Peace is self-explanatory. Prosperity is about the jobs and the opportunities. And the people is about the movement, the freedom, the holidays, and everything else that we all enjoy. And if we can't understand these things, these three things, then I'm sorry, anybody who can't grasp these have lost the plot as far as I'm concerned. I think Councillor who said Burch summed it up exactly. A good Scots word to describe a complete mess and a complete shambles. And why should we have another referendum? Because, and why should this council be passionately in favour of having another referendum? Because it affects our people. It affects our industries, our agriculture, our horticulture, our care sector, the hospitality sector, the tourism sector. Anybody who was at or listened and looked at the feedback from the officer's presentation to councillors would easily be convinced of the need to have a second opportunity for a second vote. It's not a big issue, it's not a big debate to have in your mind. It's simply one of conscience and common sense. And I strongly support the motion, Provost.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I think we'll go to the vote now. Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Provost. I'm grateful to you for allowing me to bring this motion to Council, and I appreciate the concern that's been expressed in the Chamber, not just from myself, but from all political groups. David Davis made a good point the other day there. I was listening to him on Radio 4, and he said that if we have another vote, what happens if it's the opposite way around? If it's 52% remain, 48% leave? He said, what happens then? But, Provost, that's the problem with referendums. I said, they're just a snapshot in time. We have to decide as a country and as a parliament and as a Prime Minister and Cabinet what is best in the long-term future for the UK. And quite clearly, I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues believe that's been part of the European family. We would not believe, if we thought back 3 years, would we believe that the government is about to spend £2 billion on extra border staff? That they're putting the army on standby? They're telling companies to stockpile medicines, food, and all the goods that they'll require to keep them going from 3 to 6 months, the costs in that are enormous. And yet it seems to be done as if it means nothing. But it's like being on the Titanic, sailing towards the iceberg, and we're all sitting down in our cabin, knowing that there's nobody in the bridge. And they're just doing nothing, and you could see the iceberg coming. This country is going to be very much poorer if Brexit goes ahead. Surely to goodness, someone, somewhere, will take the initiative and stop this happening. My despair is because Theresa May seems to not be able to do that. She doesn't seem to be able to focus on a way to stop this terribly damaging event taking place. 100 days to go. People in Scotland and throughout the world wish each other a prosperous 2019. It's so sad to think that we are likely not to have a prosperous 2019. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. I will go to the vote. Scott.
Thank you, Provost. We're dealing with item 3.2 on the agenda. We have a motion from Councillor Robertson, seconded by Councillor Simpson, the terms of which are set out before you on the agenda. We have an amendment from Councillor McCall, seconded by Councillor Ahern, the terms of which have been circulated. In terms of standing orders, can I ask councillors to indicate whether they're voting for the motion or the amendment? Councillor Ahern.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bailey.
Abstain.
Councillor Baird. Councillor Band.
Motion.
Councillor Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Braun.
Councillor Braun.
Sorry, Councillor Braun. Motion. Councillor Brock. Sorry, Councillor Braun voted for the motion. Councillor Brock. Councillor Audrey Coates.
Amendment.
Councillor Harry Coates.
Motion.
Councillor Donaldson.
Motion.
Councillor Duggan.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Forbes.
Amendment.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth.
Amendment.
Councillor Jarvis. Councillor Lane.
Motion.
Councillor Lyle.
Amendment.
Councillor McCall.
Amendment.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor McDade.
Amendment.
Councillor McEwen.
Motion.
Provost.
Amendment.
Councillor Parrott.
Motion.
Councillor Pover.
Motion.
Councillor Purves.
Amendment.
Councillor Rebeck. Councillor Reid.
Amendment.
Councillor Robertson. Councillor Shires. Councillor Simpson.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Waters.
Motion.
Councillor Williamson.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Thank you, Provost. I have 20 votes for the motion, 16 votes for the amendment and 1 abstention, and the motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, councillors. The next item on the agenda is equal right of appeal. The Deputy Provost will take this particular item.
Thank you, Provost. We have a motion before us, equal rights of appeal. The motion is in the name of Councillor Purves and Councillor Stewart. Councillor Purves, would you like to propose the motion, please? Try again.
His light on.
Not deliberate. Okay.
On you go.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. The legislative framework for the current planning system in Scotland is fundamentally imbalanced and unfair. As colleagues will know, many of our constituents have deeply held concerns about the planning system. The Scottish Government and others have recognised this, with the Government recently commissioning a report on barriers to community engagement in the planning system. Rather worryingly, however, it found that there was, quote, a serious lack of trust, respect and confidence in the system, and that community engagement Sorry, my microphone went again. This is a positive step that there is now a widespread agreement that the current system needs reform. Unfortunately, this seems to be where the agreement ends. The current political consensus seems to be in favour of a greater front-loading of the planning system. This simply means that efforts are made to increase community involvement and engagement with development early on in the development plan process. Now, this is of course welcome, as is the suggestion from the Scottish Government that would introduce local place plans that would allow communities to better reflect their own needs and priorities for the local area. Amendments to strengthen the power of these plans from both the Scottish Government and opposition parties are also welcome. The problem arises, however, when these plans are not adhered to, effectively rendering this front-loading of the system and the community's efforts meaningless and redundant. And this is why the current system is unfair. When developers see their application refused, they are given another opportunity to appeal that decision to the Scottish Government. When an application goes against the genuine concerns of our local communities, however, and against the local development plan, our communities have no such right. Opponents of an equal right of appeal suggest that it would stifle economic development and would clog up the planning system. In countries such as Ireland, Denmark and New Zealand, where this system is already in place and communities already have a similar equal right of appeal, this quite simply has not been the case. In fact, if developers had the possibility of a community right of appeal in their minds when proposing applications initially, it may incentivise them to bring forward fundamentally better quality applications in the first place that address the concerns of local communities. This is an issue on which people and parties have many views, but I would ask councillors today to think about what is in the best interests of their constituents who elected them and what will be the best way of addressing their concerns in the planning system in Scotland. For me, I am clear that the answer to that question is an equal right of appeal for our communities and would encourage members across the chamber to support it this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stewart, you are seconding this motion.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I have previously spoken in this chamber on the issue of fairness and the expectations of our community, particularly in respect of the local development plan when we considered that back in August. I think this motion extends and builds on that foundation. Opposing an equal right of appeal, formally a third-party right of appeal, assumes two things. Firstly, it assumes that an equal right of appeal for communities would clog up the planning system. But this is merely an assumption, and it is an assumption unsupported by facts or evidence. In fact, as Councillor Purves indicated, if developers have to have in the back of their minds that successful applications could also be appealed, then they might, and I trust would, be more likely to engage communities at an early stage and bring forward proposals that everyone could get behind. An equal right of appeal, therefore, could, in fact, assist in laying out a clearer and fairer framework for planning systems and engender greater trust and confidence in the planning system in our communities and engender greater trust between planners, developers, communities, elected members and indeed reporters. Secondly, opposing an equal right of appeal assumes that communities are opposed to development, put colloquially, that they are NIMBYs. My experience is that the communities in my ward are not. They generally recognise the need for more housing, but want to ensure that development is of good quality, supported by the requisite infrastructure, and that it is suited to local conditions and circumstances. And in that respect, it is incumbent on developers, planners, elected members, reporters, everyone involved in the planning process, in fact, to recognise that they and we do not have a monopoly on wisdom, and that local communities are the experts on what happens outside their back windows. If they spot something going wrong, perhaps, just perhaps, those local communities are right, but if they have no equal right of appeal, they can't advance that view. For me, this is overridingly, Deputy Provost, a matter of fairness, and I hope that colleagues across the Council will feel able to support this motion, and in doing so, stand up for the communities that they represent. I beg leave to second the motion.
Thank you. Now, first of all, do we have an amendment? Councillor McCall, do you have copies of your amendment?
I do have copies. Could they be distributed, please?
Could these please be circulated? Thank you. And we'll allow a couple of minutes for folk to read the amendment. Can I please check, do all members have a copy of the proposed amendment? We'll allow another minute or so just for folk to read that, digest that.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm actually going to read what's been circulated. Whilst I recognise the concern of local communities, I believe that the process as it stands has adequate allowances and respectfully oppose the request for a third-party right of appeal to the planning bill currently progressing through Scottish Parliament process. The current system allows the community the opportunity to halt an application in committee, and it is my experience that communities have reversed the decision of the Planning Department in many cases. This additional right of appeal has been fully explored, and it has been believed could result in the process stagnating or even halting completely. This is a position that would be detrimental to the economic growth of Perth and Kinross as a whole, and with high streets all over the area suffering from changes in buying culture, it's now not the time to put further pressure to development and its financial advantages to our area. Therefore, I propose that we reject the terms of the proposed motion to await the outcome of the planning bill that is currently progressing through the Scottish Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Under our present planning process, any community has the chance to present its objection to a planning application being heard by committee, which, given the strength of argument, may result in the said committee to offer competent grounds for refusing the application before it. present and previous members of the committee will agree that experience has shown that this can and does happen, and so the current process is sufficiently robust for purpose. In these circumstances, I would agree that the need for a further right of appeal to be an unnecessary requirement. It has already been considered, and there is a major concern that such a procedure will cause the planning process to grind to a stop as a result of a backlog of such appeals. And as has already been mentioned, there may also be a negative impact on the economic expansion of Perth and Kinross. And as such, I am happy to second this amendment to oppose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now contributions to debate. Councillor Tom Gray.
Thank you. I too cannot support this motion. And apart from the things that have been said already, there are two specific facts which, to my mind, are the difference between the case for an appeal by an applicant and that by a community. Firstly, a Development Management Committee is comprised of community representatives.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I think it's significant the fact that the mover and seconder of the amendment are actually the convener and vice-convener of the Development Management Committee. The people are actually on the coal face, so to speak. I think it's very, very unfortunate that the mover of the motion and the seconder hadn't actually had discussions with both the convener and vice-convener before lodging this motion, because it's, as Councillor Gray has said, that it will cause more problems than it would actually solve. I've actually sat in the Development Management Committee on a number of occasions, and often there's very contentious planning applications coming forward, which the members are minded to refuse. And our council officers, our legal officers, are very good at helping to find reasonable and sensible planning grounds for doing so. So I think we have a reasonably fair system now, and what's proposed in the motion would actually just cause more chaos, I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duggan.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I also can't support the motion that's been brought forward in this respect. I think the proposition within the motion is that of parity between applicants and objectors, and I see no parity in that respect, because the difference in the investment in time and in finance is marked and profound. An applicant will invest time, money and apply ambition to their proposition. And also these applicants and applications for development across Perth and Kinross, these are one of the most important areas of economic development that create a substantial heartbeat and investment across this local authority area. But that's not to say, as Councillor Gray has already pointed out, that all applications are sound and competent and will add value to our communities. Clearly, they're not all sound and competent and add value to our communities, but it's my belief that insofar as there is no perfect system applied to anything that we do, that the planning system under review just now will be reformed in a way that is consistent with the ambitions for economic investment, and that we should not seek to promote a false parity where none exists. And if I've not made that point clear, I would suggest finally in closing, Provost, that an objection is contingent on an application. An application can never be contingent on an objection, and I think that is fundamental to supporting the motion. Having said that, I would appeal to the mover of the amendment that it might be in everybody's interests to strike paragraph 2 and 3 from the amendment and just have the brevity of 1 and 2. That would be far clearer and easier to support.
Thank you. We'll come to that point in a moment. Does anybody else wish to contribute to the debate? I don't see any hands going up. Councillor McCall, as the mover of the amendment, Councillor Dugan has made a suggestion. I don't think he's moved it formally, but if we take it as a suggestion, have you a reaction to that, please?
Many reactions, Deputy Provost, but I'm happy to remove them from the wording of the amendment. It's been stated, so I'm happy to remove it from the wording.
Does your seconder agree with that?
I'm happy to agree, Deputy Provost.
Okay, so therefore the motion, the amendment would be...
Deputy Provost, I'm not allowed to sum up.
We'll come to that, Councillor. Okay, just a moment, please. The amendment, therefore, would read. Would you just like to reiterate the amendment so everybody understands it fully?
Happily. Whilst I recognise the concerns of local communities, I believe the process as it stands has adequate allowances and respectfully oppose the request for a third-party right of appeal to the planning bill currently progressing through the Scottish Parliament process. I therefore propose that we reject the terms of the proposed motion and await the outcome of this planning bill currently progressing through the Scottish Parliament.
Okay, I take it that's quite clear to everybody. Proceed to the summing up. Councillor Purves, you're like a coiled spring.
Thank you.
On you go.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Just a couple of points to pick up on. Councillor Braun referenced that this would stifle economic development in Perth and Kinross. I would suggest, given that the planning bill would apply to the whole of Scotland, it wouldn't leave Perth and Kinross at any competitive disadvantage, even if we were to accept the assumption that having an equal right of appeal would do such a thing, which I do not. As has been raised, communities do have the option to engage in the process at the moment, but there is still this fundamental distrust in the system, and this can only be addressed by bringing up communities to the same level of developers. I don't think the fact that developers have made significant financial investments into a community, where communities, yes, they have significant capacity to campaign and to lobby their councillors, but might not have the same significant resources, should be used as a reason to deny them such an appeal. Also, I'd like to say that in terms of the questions again that have been raised about the number of appeals that might be coming forward in Ireland, again, where, as I mentioned before, this equal right of appeal is already in place, only 1% of applications are appealed, both, and that includes those from developers and those from communities as well. As I say again, I think that there is still this fundamental distrust in the planning system, and it's probably trying to tell me to stop. Microphone again. We need to ensure that there is fairness and balance in the system, and I would encourage councillors to support the amendment, the motion. Sorry, the motion, and an equal right of appeal. I'll sit down now. Thanks.
Councillor Purves, thank you. You're not only battling with the microphone, but battling with which way you're heading for a moment there. Can I just say one thing? slight chatter in the back row or second back row, and sometimes on both sides of the House, isn't helpful to the debate process. I know I can be Mr Grumpy, but I just want to mention that in the summing up, councillors should have the right to be heard in silence. Now we'll proceed to the vote.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Before I take the vote, we've noticed that some of the pages are actually missing on your green procedural note, so we'll arrange for them to be redistributed as soon as possible. Councillors, we're dealing with item 3.3 on the agenda. A motion by Councillor Purves, seconded by Councillor Stewart, the terms of which are set out. We have an amendment from Councillor McCall, seconded by Councillor Braun, that has been further amended to include the first and last paragraphs on the paper that was circulated to you. Can I ask councillors to indicate whether they're voting for the motion or the amendment? Councillor Ahern.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Amendment.
Councillor Bailey.
Motion.
Councillor Baird. Councillor Band. Councillor Barrett.
Amendment.
Councillor Braun.
Amendment.
Councillor Brock. Councillor Audrey Coates.
Amendment.
Councillor Harry Coates.
Amendment.
Councillor Donaldson.
Amendment.
Councillor Dugan.
Amendment.
Councillor Drysdale.
Amendment.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Forbes. Amendment. Councillor Gray. Amendment. Councillor Illingworth.
Amendment.
Councillor Jarvis. Amendment. Councillor Lane.
Motion.
Councillor Lyle. Amendment. Councillor McCall.
Amendment.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor McEwen.
Amendment.
Provost.
Amendment.
Councillor Parrott.
Amendment.
Councillor Pover. Amendment. Councillor Purves.
Motion.
Councillor Rebeck. Amendment. Councillor Reid.
Amendment.
Councillor Robertson. Amendment. Councillor Shires. Amendment. Councillor Simpson.
Amendment.
Councillor Stewart.
Motion.
Councillor Waters.
Amendment.
Councillor Williamson.
Amendment.
Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Thank you. I have 6 votes for the motion and 30 votes for the amendment, and the amendment is carried.
Thank you very much indeed for that discussion. We'll now pass back to the Provost for the next item.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Minutes of item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. Can I ask that you're ready to put your hands up to recognise your body that you're supporting? It's a local review body, 18th of September.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Planning and Development Management Committee, 26th of September.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Audit Committee, 26th of September.
Move for noting, Provost.
Licensing Committee, 4th of October.
Move for noting, Provost.
Local Review Body, 16th of October.
Move for noting, Provost.
Councillor Drysdale. Local Review Body, Councillor Braun. Sorry?
Seconded.
Thank you. Planning and Development Management Committee, 24th of October.
Move for noting, Provost. It was subject to minor amendments to the minutes.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Councillor Braun.
Microphone issues.
Provost, move for noting, Provost, but subject to minor amendments as agreed at yesterday's planning meeting.
Okay. You got that, Scott? Okay. And Housing Communities Committee, 31st of October.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Lifelong Learning Committee, 31st of October.
Move for noting, Provost.
Seconding, Provost.
Enterprise and Infrastructure Committee, 7th of November.
Move for noting, Provost, excluding Article 641.
Thank you.
I move Article 641, Provost.
Thank you.
Second, Provost.
Thank you. Audit Committee, 7th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Seconding, Provost.
Local Review Body, 13th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Licensing Committee, 15th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Seconded, Provost.
And Planning and Development Management Committee, 21st of November.
Move for noting, Provost, but again with amendments agreed at yesterday's meeting.
Thank you.
Happy to second, Provost.
Okay, thank you. You got that, Scott? Thank you. Item 6, Treasury Activity and Compliance Report. Can I invite Stewart Mackenzie, Head of
Apologies,
Finance,
Provost.
to
On a
introduce.
point of order, did we actually cover
Okay.
items 4 and 5?
Which one's that? I beg your pardon. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Can we agree the minute of the meeting of the Council of 3rd of October 2018?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Just done 5.
Right, Treasury Activity and Compliance Report. Can Stewart Mackenzie.
Thank you, Provost. This report advises Council of Treasury activity undertaken for the quarter ended 30th of September 2018. In August, the Monetary Policy Committee voted to increase the bank rate from 0.5% to 0.75% in response to inflationary pressures in the economy. The Public Works Loans Board rates, which determine the Council's borrowing costs, are shown in Appendix 1 and rose gradually over the quarter. With PWLB rates increasing, no new long-term borrowing was undertaken and cash flow was managed through short-term temporary borrowing during the quarter. A scheduled £5 million repayment of PWLB debt in July, however, reduced the Council's long-term debt to £359 million. Investment activity was undertaken in accordance with the Council's cash flow requirements. The total level of investments increased from £51.3 million to £61 million over the quarter, reflecting the improved cash flow the Council normally experiences at this time of year, for example in terms of non-domestic rates income. The average interest generated on investments also increased from 0.72% to 0.79%. There were no breaches in compliance with approved Treasury and investment policy during the quarter, and all prudential indicators remain within approved limits. Section 7 of our report notes the annual review of the Council's Treasury management practice, undertaken in accordance with the CITFA Treasury Code. Following this review, the Treasury Management Systems document has been updated with a copy placed in the Council's SharePoint site for information. Happy to take questions, Provost.
Thank you, Stuart. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, given there might yet be some leeway, who knows, for capitalisation of projects, can I ask on the Public Works Loan Board, and that's about 2/3 of our total debt, could I ask Stewart Mackenzie, the position on 50-year money at the end of September was just over 2.5%. Could I ask what the position is now? And I know it's maybe looking into his crystal ball, where he thinks the trend might go over the next year.
Thank you for sitting there if you do that.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. I think we're both beginning to look forward to this. In terms of recent activity, thank you for your question. In terms of recent activity, I hesitate to say this, but there's an upside to every crisis. So, Council debated the Brexit issue around at the beginning of the meeting, and we've seen some reduction in PWLB rates. So in the next report to Council, you'll see some new borrowing taken at a point in time because the rates fell to near 2.3, 2.4% mark. Moving ahead, the rates have steadily increased over the last week. Apologies, Councillor Dawson, I'm struggling with my microphone here. If the opportunity arises, we'll certainly take money if the rates reduce significantly. As I say, we took some additional borrowing at the beginning of this month when the rates moved significantly downwards. So it's an opportunistic market, but we'll take advantage when we can.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Provost. I'm sure Stewart will be able to bat this one back straight away. It's short-term borrowing, Stewart. At the end of June, it was 5.6 million, and the end of September, outstanding was 24.5 million. I was just wondering, I know it'll work in spikes, but if there was any reason for that.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Lane. With the movement in PWLB rates, it was just more effective to take money short-term than it was to borrow long-term to manage cash flow. The level of short-term borrowing we've got is reduced significantly since that point in time. So as you say, it's just a kind of in spikes and cyclical.
Okay, Councillor Dugan.
Thank you, Provost. As if to demonstrate that Councillor Lang and I are always singing off the same hymn sheet on the very same page, Stewart, on the item above, long-term debt outstanding, it's 3.29%. It's my understanding that that's a favourable position for Perth Kinross Council. Could you clarify how we perform in that particular measure as relating to other local authorities across the country? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Dugan. There's no index or standard benchmark at the moment, but your questions and previous questions at Council has prompted, I suppose, an interest in my mind of maybe trying to establish that. But in terms of our overall indebtedness, we're probably somewhere in the middle in terms of Scottish local authorities.
Okay, there are no more questions. Oh, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Provost. I'm on page 155. I note category 2, the foreign banks and institutions which could be approved in investment counterparty lists. Are you sensing... Sorry. Do you know whether or not, if Brexit proceeds, that list may be substantially reduced, and whether that will have an impact, a significant impact on the Council's Treasury work? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Parrott. We've had no indication that that might be a consequence of Brexit, but obviously we live in uncertain times, and if there was any movements either in the credit rating or access to these foreign banks, we'd amend the list at that time and then bring it to Council respectively for approval. So this is a dynamic list. If anything changes, we would amend the list on the day rather than await the next Council meeting.
Okay, thank you, Stewart. Is there no more questions? Councillor Lyle, can I ask you to sum up? No motion, sorry.
Thank you, Provost. This report provides councillors with a summary of the Treasury management transactions undertaken between the 1st of July and the 30th of September 18. Specifically, the report provides elected members with an update on compliance with the Council's Treasury management policy, the Treasury management practices, the investment strategy, and the prudential indicators for the same period. The report also covers the annual review of the Treasury management systems document. The Head of Finance has provided members with a summary of the report, and I'm pleased to confirm that once again there were no breaches in compliance with the Council's approved Treasury management policies and practices. Our capital programme remains affordable, sustainable over the medium term. I ask the Council to note the contents of this report, and I'm happy to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett, second.
In the interest of brevity, Provost, I'll just move it formally or second it formally.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Move the report. Item 7, Biennial Review of Financial Regulations 2018. I invite Stewart again.
Thank you, Provost. The report summarises the process undertaken to review the Council's financial regulations and seeks approval for the updated financial regulations attached at Appendix 1. The review has been based upon existing regulations which are familiar to officers, tested by internal audit through their fieldwork, and positively assessed by the Council's external auditors. Each service management team puts in place arrangements to monitor compliance with the regulations. The financial regulations are accompanied where appropriate by supplementary guidance, enabling specific or emerging issues to be addressed. Should more substantive changes be required, the regulations can be referred back to Council at any time. The regulations have been reviewed by internal audit, the Officer Policy and Governance Group, and the Executive Officer team. Changes have been highlighted in Appendix 1, and in particular I can draw your attention to Section 1.4, which has been updated to reflect arrangements in respect of the Perth Kinross Integration Joint Board. Section 3.1 has been updated to reflect recommendations from the Council's external auditors. And Section 5.2 has been updated in respect of a new People Equity Fund. As the majority of changes over the last few years have been presentational, it is proposed to amend the frequency of review from every 2 years to every 3 years. Happy to take questions, Provost.
Thank you, Stewart. Are there any questions? No. Councillor Lyle, can you move the report?
Thank you again, Provost. This is the biennial update of the Council's financial regulations. The financial regulations are the cornerstone of the reputation for excellent financial management. The Council also proposes moving to a 3-year update of the financial regulations, with any pressing adjustments being approved either by the SP&R Committee or by full Council. Happy to move the paper.
Councillor Barrett, second the report.
Thanks, Provost. The financial regulations ensure that the Council finances are monitored and reported in accordance to the law and in an open and transparent way. It is proposed that the Council move from biennial review of the regulations to triennial review to reflect the minimal changes that have occurred, and I've resisted the temptation to utter the words dry and dusty with regard to this report.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Any comments on the report? Accept the report? Agree with it? Yeah, thank you. Item 8, Revenue Budget 2019-20, 2021 and 21-22. I've agreed to accept this late report that was issued yesterday, and Stewart McKenzie, Head of Finance, is going to introduce the report and explain the reasons behind the timescale for its issue. Stewart.
Thank you, Provost, and apologies to yourself and to elected members for the lateness of this paper. The information required to prepare the report was only formally issued on Monday evening, although briefings for group leaders have been provided in advance of the Council meeting. So thank you, Provost, for accepting this late paper. This report provides an update on progress with the budget, including the Council's provisional funding position for 1920 following the Cabinet Secretary's budget statement to the Scottish Parliament on the 12th of December. Finance Circular 8/2018, detailing individual council allocations, was issued on the evening of the 17th of December, and through COSLA, Scottish Government officials are currently in the process of responding to queries on the settlement. I would therefore advise that the funding position and analysis set out within the report should be considered provisional and may change. The budget review groups will be updated as more information becomes available in the run-up to the special council meeting on the 20th of February. I would also note that, as in previous years, a special meeting in February to set the Council's own budget is likely to be in advance of a formal approval by Parliament of a Scottish budget. Sections 2 and 3 of the report summarise the implications of the Chancellor's autumn statement on the devolved Scottish budget. Section 4 provides an initial assessment of the revenue and capital funding allocations. The draft Scottish budget provides information for 2019-20 only. The Council's total revenue funding for 2019-20 is provisionally set at £250.919 million. In absolute terms, this is a £3.151 million increase in the allocation for the current year. As summarised in Table 4 of the report, £10.722 million of this funding is, however, either ring-fenced for or directed toward specific Scottish Government initiatives. On a like-for-like basis, the Council's provisional revenue funding allocation for 2019-20 represents a £7.571 million cash reduction, or 3.06% over the equivalent position for this year. The medium-term financial plan approved in October assumed a 2.3% cash reduction in Scottish Government funding. The provisional allocation for 2019-20 is therefore £1.989 million lower than the Council's budget planning assumption and may require the identification of additional savings. The provisional level of capital grant funding for 2019-20, as is set out in Table 5, in totals £34.288 million. The net increase in capital grant is £9.492 million, which mainly relates to advance funding for flood prevention schemes previously assumed to be received in 2020-21. The report also highlights potential issues in relation to ongoing negotiations on the 2018-19 pay awards, which may impact upon both current and future year budgets, and assumptions on the funding of £3 million of an increase in teachers' pension costs from the 1st of April. Section 5 of the report summarises progress to date with the Council's provisional revenue budget. As set out in Table 6, over the coming 3 years, there is currently an estimated £12.2 million funding gap between identified pressures and savings before taking account of the implications of a recent settlement announcement. This presents a significant financial challenge to the Council in setting its revenue budget in February, and the Executive Officer team will continue to support elected members in considering their approach to setting a balanced budget. Happy to take questions, Provost.
Thank you, Stewart. Are there any questions of the report? No. Councillor Lyle, can you move the report, please?
Thank you, Provost. This report provides elected members with an early initial analysis of the provisional funding allocations for this Council for the financial year 1920. Confirmation of the provisional funding levels for the Council was only received very late on Monday when the Scottish Government issued the Finance Circular. The headline level of funding for 1920 is 250 million approximately, which on the face of it represents a cash increase of 3.1 million, or just under 1.3%. However, when officers have analysed the funding, it is clear that within the headline figure there is a significant level of resources which are ring-fenced to deliver Scottish Government priorities, such as the expansion of early years and health and social care. When this new funding is adjusted to provide a more meaningful comparison with last year's settlement, it is apparent there is a significant reduction in resources available to deliver core council services. This will undoubtedly present real challenges when we set budgets next year. In fact, on a like-for-like basis, the Council's funding over 1920 represents a cash reduction of 7.485 million, or just over 3%. Whilst these figures remain provisional, This level of funding reduction is in excess of our medium-term financial planning assumptions, and there will be a significant impact on the level of services that this council can offer next year. There is also further uncertainty in respect of pay claims and teachers' pensions, which may, in actual fact, increase this gap. There is more work to be done in the budget, and I will keep all elected members informed of any developments between now and setting the council's budget on the 20th of February. Thank you. Happy to move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. Scottish local government and Perth and Kinross Council are once again on the receiving end of a real terms and cash cut in funding at the hands of the Scottish Government, for whom local government is the fall guy for unfair funding cuts. Cynics might suggest that we've been disproportionately targeted in order to give the Greens some windmills to tilt at in the pantomime that has become the Scottish Parliament budget process. Others might want to consider just how far out of step Derek Mackay is with the Scottish Government's declared intention to modernise local governance. The watchwords of that dialogue are about fiscal empowerment and fiscal autonomy, about devolving the levers and the flexibility to deliver change and transformation in our community. Instead, ring fencing and short-termism and central control are the orders of the day. The practice is wedded to a bygone age. The SNP government does not practice locally what it preaches nationally, so we're stuck with a capped council tax 2 years after the permafrost of a decade of brutally imposed council tax freezes. So in Perth, we have a budget cut by more than £7.5 million, more than 3% in cash terms and almost 5.5% in real terms. Para 4.10 of the report hits the nail on the head, and I quote, "This is a cash reduction and does not take account of the additional impact of inflation or demand growth, resulting in a significant real terms reduction." Paragraph 4.11 can be summed up as, "Our best estimate of how bad the local government settlement and Perth and Kinross's allocation was going to be was out by £2 million and not in a good way." We're now faced with finding that additional £2 million over and above the hugely challenging and incomplete savings options. The gap between the pressures we face and the savings proposal put forward, even if we were minded to implement the most damaging and unpalatable, comes to more than £12 million over the next 3 years. When you add in Derek Mackay's cut to Perth and Kinross, that makes for a funding gap of over £9 million next year. Derek Mackay has put forward a settlement which is bad for Scotland, damaging for communities, and way beyond bad for Perth and Kinross. This report nails the lie in the spin of his budget announcement, which was previously exposed by COSLA in their immediate post-budget analysis. And Provost, if we're reliant on the Greens to get us out of it, then heaven help us. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Dugan.
Thank you very much, Provost. It really just falls to me to echo the assurance and observations of the Council's Head of Finance and the Leader of the Council that this is a provisional settlement, but that assurance only goes so far. These are difficult financial times, Provost, for local authorities in Scotland and across these islands. There are difficult settlements having to be endured by the Scottish Government in Edinburgh, and the fiscal situation in the UK is not a particularly rosy one. I know most people in this chamber have the intellectual wherewithal and credence to understand that there is not an avalanche of cash into Edinburgh that somehow an SNP government is holding back from us. The problems do not start in this country at the border. They're in a broader context. And in closing, Provost, I'd like to thank the Leader of the Council for his sober assessment of what is a challenging economic output and draw the Council's attention to the difference in behaviour between the Leader of the Liberal Democrats and his obsession with backbiting against the SNP and the Leader of the Council, who takes the same difficult situation and speaks to the way in which he's hoping to deal with it. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Provost. I think just one comment I'd like to make is that I think we really need to be careful as we go through the budget process that the narrative that we're going to get from the right, literally and metaphorically to me in this chamber, is that the ring fencing of, I think, nearly £10 million for health, social care and early years childcare expansion is not a bad thing. It's actually a fairly blooming well good thing.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? No. Do we agree the report? Thank you. Item 9 on the agenda is the European Social Fund Employability Programmes. I can invite the Deputy Chief Executive, Jim Valentine, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. This report provides an update on activities supported by the European Social Fund Employability Programmes since 2016. On behalf of the Community Planning Partnership, the Council has managed the programme and supported our delivery partners to provide the services needed by people facing multiple barriers to access support, training or employment. More than 700 individuals have benefited from the programmes to date, and some examples are provided in the annex to the report you have been asked to consider today. There is now an opportunity to extend the current programmes until March 2023, and a grant offer has been made by the Scottish Government. The report's recommendation is to accept that offer. Myself and Serge Morone are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any questions on the report? Where? Councillor Forbes. Can't see you down there, Angus.
Thank you, Provost. That's because you were looking that way, Provost. That's why you couldn't see me down there.
I was looking both ways.
I'm very much still on this side of the room, I can assure you. I don't think I'd be welcome at that side of the room anyway. I digress. Once again, my efforts to remain paperless, Provost, have failed me, as all the notes I've made on this paper have disappeared. But one thing did jump out at me. It was on page 205. It was an underspend of 1.243 million, if I read this correctly, and I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this, but can someone explain to me what that is?
Jim? Fair Serge.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Forbes. The underspend on phase 1 is due mainly to the late start of the programme. Although we were supposed to start in October 15 and the Programme Management Office started at that point, we only received the confirmation of the Scottish Government in August 16, so which obviously had an impact on the expenditure that we had. And we had also some slight under-delivery from the activities, which obviously have accumulated into that underspend.
Okay, any other questions? Do we agree the report?
Comments?
Sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Lyle, to move the report. Beg your pardon. I got thrown with you, Angus.
Thank you, Provost. The Council and its partners can provide support to change lives. The paper being considered today provides us with real-life examples of the difference that we can make as a council. Individuals facing challenging circumstances can access the services they need to help them combat poverty and access training and employment. It is anticipated that more than 1,400 individuals will benefit from these services over the life of the next and final phase of this project. The report recommends accepting the grant offer from the Scottish Government, which will lever more funding locally to help these services. I'm very pleased to move this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. Some of the case studies at the end of the report illuminate what ESF employability funding means for people with learning difficulties, disabilities, or in danger of becoming further from employment, how it can transform lives and the outcomes that it achieves, improving people's skills, experience, employability, and finding employment. And we've heard previously in reports to this Council about the success of our employability pipeline, and this report shows that to the start of November this year, 365 people have received tailored employability support for the year, with 378 receiving other assistance. Thank you, Provost. Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Any comments on the report? Councillor Lang.
It's just in response to Councillor Forbes' comment on underspends. I thought he would have been well aware of underspends because of the administration's budget proposals in February, many of which have not even coughed up a pound yet. So I think it would be quite a few underspends. I thought we'd understood that.
Thank you, Lang. Councillor Lang. Any other? Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Provost. I, of course, have to respond to Councillor Lane's comment there, and I would imagine anyone in the SNP would know an awful lot more about underspend than anybody else. By my estimate, they've got more than £1 billion sitting around somewhere, which could come to this council and could solve some of the problems that we've talked about already. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Any other comments? Do we agree with the report? Agree. Thank you. The following two items, item 10 and 11, will be taken by the Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Provost. Colleagues, we're on to paper 10, the Chief Social Worker Officer Annual Report for 2017-18. And I'd like to ask Jackie Pepper if she'll introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm pleased to present this annual report for the year 2017 to 2018 to Council. And this annual report follows a format that's set out by the Chief Social Work Advisor to the Scottish Government to enable national themes to be extracted. It's intended to assist Council to have oversight of the full range of social work and social care services across Perth and Kinross. And although the responsibility for social work and social care services for older people and some adults is delegated to the Perth and Kinross Integrated Joint Board, it's important that elected members maintain a good understanding of all social work and social care services in order to be assured that statutory social work responsibilities are fulfilled, that they are satisfied, that quality is being maintained, and to ensure that you're confident that risks are being managed effectively. This report draws together information and data into one place about how social work services are being delivered, what is working well, particularly in terms of impact, areas for improvement, and to set out how change is being planned. The report for this year, 2017-18, identifies that very positive performance has been sustained, and there is evidence that investment in transformation is beginning to address some of the long-standing pressures in some areas. At the same time, social work and social care services are planning and are playing a very strong part in achieving aspirations for high quality care, support, prevention, earlier intervention and new models of service delivery which are sustainable and better at meeting the needs of our communities. This performance has been achieved against a backdrop of increasing demand pressures, particularly in services for older people and for looked after children. The report confirms a strong contribution by social work and social care staff to public protection and to improving outcomes of vulnerable people within a context of integration and multi-agency partnership working. The extent to which the social work and social care workforce is motivated and committed to providing high-quality services is clearly demonstrated. Nevertheless, significant and unprecedented challenges are anticipated in the years ahead associated with continued rising demand due to population and demographic changes, the ongoing need to shift the balance of care into locally provided community care services, and transforming traditional models of care towards greater personalisation and family-centred approaches, as well as budget and financial restraint. The workforce will continue to experience considerable legislative and organisational change over the next few years, and this report is a credit to our highly skilled and committed staff who year on year embrace change, complex challenges and demands, and at the same time never lose sight of their social work values of service, social justice, integrity, dignity and worth of the person, and the importance of human relationships. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm joined by Diane Fraser, Head of Adult Social Work Services for the Health and Social Care Partnership, Hazel Robertson, Head of Services for Children, Young People and Families, and Nicola Rogerson, who's the Service Manager for Criminal Justice Social Work Services, for more detailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Before we proceed to questions, I'd just like to draw the report to which is an important and informative report with a lot of meat in it, to the members of the press who are here, and during the holidays when you think there's maybe a lighter day for news, some of the case studies in here would make excellent reading for the local population within Perth and Kinross. Having made that commercial, we'll now pass on to the questions. Councillor Pover.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'd just like to refer to page 278 of the report, which highlights the fact that it was not possible to recruit mental health officer applicants in 2017 and 18. And it suggests that the report suggests that that was offered again and there was no uptake on this offer. And the reason given was uncertainty due to service restructuring. And I'm sort of conscious that restructuring is a part of social work generally, and it has been throughout my career. So I'm just wondering why, given that this is at odds with other local authorities that I've spoken to, why there's no uptake on mental health officer training.
Jackie, I think the microphone's playing tricks again.
Apologies, I'll start again. Oops. Thanks for your question. It's helpful to have a spotlight on that very small workforce because, as the report says, at the end of April we had 11 whole-time equivalent qualified mental health officers. And in the year that that was the year in which the early intervention and prevention team, where many of these staff are working, was being redesigned and created. So I think there was certainly feedback from staff that they didn't want to enter into what is actually quite a demanding postgraduate qualification during that period. But I'm pleased to report that since that time we now have 14 staff, 13.5, so there's been a net increase over the last 8 to 9 months in terms of mental health officers. And growing our own through training isn't the only way we can do that. We can also attract new recruits, and we've been able to do that. And we have 3 who are taking up the training now, and hopefully that will and increase that pool even further. I think throughout that period we have performed quite well in terms of the Scottish average, so we're around that or above that consistently. So the period of time in which that was also happening was around the time of transition for mental health services as well, so there was particular demands on that team. Yeah.
Of course.
That's great, Jackie. I just wondered if there's an issue with managers allowing team members to go from different resources, but given that the duration of the course is in excess of 6 months, is there an issue with other, because that has been an issue in the past with other local authorities, is it an issue with Perth and Kinross that managers are struggling to release interested workers onto the course? Thanks.
Thank you. We have an arrangement locally where there is funding to backfill for staff, so the release of staff shouldn't mean that that's a great problem for team leaders. We're also looking to expand the pool because we have mental health officers in out of hours and early intervention and prevention, but we're also keen over the next year to make sure that we also have mental health officer qualified social workers within children and families, because that's an area of growth as well. Thanks.
That's great, thank you.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. As usual, Jackie, had an excellent report. Thank you very much indeed. And I want to voice my thanks to everybody in the teams, if you could pass that on, for all the work that they do. I actually just want to draw attention to 236 when I see that child concern reports have actually gone up, but we're actually looking at child protection investigations that haven't really moved very much at all. So can you give me an idea of why we've got child concern reports rising? I know that they're on a downward trend, but obviously the more information we have, the better. So can you give me a background into that, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor McCall. In relation to child concern reports, you'll know that's about general concerns about child welfare. They're not necessarily child protection reports that follow through. The drop between 15-16 and 16-17 was because of new arrangements that were put in place, particularly by Police Scotland, who are the major referrer of concerns. We recognise that has increased slightly, and there's more work over the next year with the Child Protection Committee. Are going to examine that in a bit more detail.
Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm on page 247 on table 11, the number of guardianships. We're all well aware of the ageing population and the pressures that that's giving rise to. But it's a matter of some concern to me, but the number of guardianships appears to have increased by almost half in just 3 years. Is that simply a reflection of a changing demographic, or are there other things in there as well, such as a change to regulations or a change to the focus being given to this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parrott. I think there are various factors involved in this, and I'm going to ask Diane Fraser to say a bit more about that. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you. Yes, we've seen an increase in the guardianship applications in Perth and Kinross, and we have discussed that with the Mental Welfare Commission at the end of year meeting that we had last month. And generally it is in relation to the reflection of the demographics within Perth and Kinross, and also to the rise around complex care needs as well that we also have in Perth and Kinross.
You say there's the scope for continued increase. Are you able to quantify that at all?
Not at this stage, we wouldn't be able to quantify it. We do work closely with local solicitors within the area in terms of trying to encourage power of attorney where possible, and for people to exercise their own rights. However, where people do not have capacity, that is where we will have discussions with families.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the report? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Jackie, for the report. It's very fulsome and welcome. And I also want to pay tribute, having a lot of personal experience of working with social work, about the exemplary job they do and the time and effort that they put into supporting the people who need them the most. However, it's in relation to one particular aspect of how the social work team is structured, and it's in reflection also of the point 4.3.1 in the work the social work team is going to do to support the Adult Protection Committee and develop specific strategies for those who are most vulnerable and at risk. And I understand it was at the time of the social care partnership was set up that a decision was made by this council to remove specialist social work roles from the council, including those specialist learning disability social workers. In my personal experience and in my opinion, I think that was a retrospective move. It has not necessarily improved the engagement between those with learning disabilities, their supporters and carers, with social work at all. That's not to say anything negative at all about the social workers who are there, who are fantastic and are accessible. However, given the risk factors faced by adults with learning disabilities in particular, I'm just wondering, as a part of your support to the Adult Protection Committee, you would at least review the decision to remove the specialist learning disability social workers, and to consider whether or not it would be advisable to reintroduce those roles again to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. Yeah, in the report I referenced the fact that I'm keen to work with the Adult Protection Committee to consider whether there is need to have more detailed work to support and protect our very vulnerable people in our community with learning disabilities. And certainly I realise that Rob Packham here is also here, and we've had some very recent conversations about taking forward over the next year an in-depth review of services for people with learning disabilities. So within that, I'm certain there will be discussions about that, but I can't say what that will lead to, but certainly that we will look at that and we will have discussions about it. Thank you.
Councillor Ling.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. It's on page 242. It's the new care home contract, and then it says care at home in the descriptive bit in the paragraph. It says a new care home contract was implemented following an extensive tendering process. The demand of care at home continues, which is two different things, to increase, and the sector has struggled to keep pace with demand. A review of the sustainability of the current service model is now required. So is that the care at home contract that we're needing to, and I was wondering if that is the case, where are we with this review, because it's been ongoing now for about 4 years, and we seem to keep reviewing it and never getting to a sustainable model.
Thank you. I think you've pointed out a typo or a missed out at home. I think this is referring to care at home, not the care home contract. And in terms of progress, I wonder if you would like to comment on that, Diane?
Thank you. Yes, the care at home redesign has been ongoing. Last year we had a significant redesign of our internal care at home provision, which we have referred to in terms of the discharge hub and the home assessment recovery team. We are now evaluating that alongside our external provision as well. So as we redesigned our internal provision, that actually changed the role of care at home from internal provision. So our external providers now provide all the long-term support within Perth and Kinross. So we're now reviewing care at home in the round.
Are there any other questions? Jackie, maybe before you stand down, I think you're planning another opportunity for us to get involved in the report, and also looking, as well as looking backwards at this report, looking forward. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, thank you. I think last year there was comments about the breadth and coverage of this report, and that elected members were seeking some opportunity to engage further with managers and frontline social work staff. So there will be an opportunity. I think you already have an invite to an event on the 28th of January in the concert hall, so look forward to having more opportunities to explore this in a bit more depth at that point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. There'll be more notification about that in early course. We're now going to move the report. Councillor Lyle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. The Chief Social Work Officer's report for the financial year 17-18 clearly shows the extent to which social care and social work services are supporting better outcomes for the people of live in Perth and Kinross. This Council has a responsibility to make sure that our social care and social work services are delivered to the highest professional standards. The Chief Social Work Officer considers that good progress has continued despite the major challenges of organisational change, adjustment to new professional roles, practice improvement, and huge transformational change. The report also makes it clear the key challenges for the delivery of our statutory social work obligations. The report highlights how social care and social work services are responding to new responsibilities associated with major changes in legislation. It notes the shifts in policy direction, as well as the increasing demand and associated budget pressures. It illustrates through case studies which show how our staff have delivered sustained and improving outcomes against a backdrop of increasing demand and significant budget pressures. There are also encouraging signs that innovation and investment and new ways of working are addressing long-standing pressures in some areas. The excellent results of external scrutiny also validates the high quality of the work of our social care and social work services. This report provides a valuable tool to gauge the quality of performance of our social care and social work services, and it is pleasing to note that this remains extremely high. We are fortunate to have staff who are committed and extremely skilled in supporting the most vulnerable citizens in Perth and Kinross. I'm sure we will all wish to congratulate our staff who work in this field, and it's my pleasure to move this report.
Thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm very happy to second this report, and as Councillor Lyle said, it's even more remarkable against a backdrop of increasing demand and budget pressures. The joint inspection of children and young people earlier this year highlighted many areas of strength across social work services and good practice, which is now of national interest in several areas. This was very much one of the highlights for our year, and again I pay tribute to Sheena Devlin, Jackie Pepper, Hazel Robertson and all their teams. The thread running through this report is the dedication, professionalism and willingness to embrace new ways of working where positive results can be achieved of all of our staff, and to them we owe our thanks. Another key element in this report is the partnership working, which continues to improve. Complacency is, however, never an option for us, and with even tighter budgets and increased pressures, we should rely even more on the expertise, flexibility and adaptability of our staff in the future to deliver the services needed by some of the most vulnerable in our communities in the face of ongoing cuts to our budgets. I would also add, Deputy Provost, that in the seasonal goodwill, that Councillor Dugan perhaps might like to, if he has any spare wrapping paper, wrap up a copy of this report and send it to Mr Mackay with our best wishes, and ask him to really consider the impact of potential future budget cuts, because it really will be the areas of service that are in this report that need to be addressed. And that is not meant to be a cheap political shot. It's actually saying that over the next couple of years, Councillor Dugan and Deputy Provost, that we really are going to face pressures, and these are exactly the areas that are likely to be hit. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments? Yes, Councillor Dugan, I can see you rising as I speak.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I think I would like to echo almost 98% or thereby, Stewart will correct me, of the Education and Lifelong Learning Convener's comments. I think she lost it a little bit at the end. I think we, all of us, and I never let a Chief Social Worker report go by without mentioning, as the Convener did, the watchword of complacency. We shouldn't ever be complacent on this or any other council, because we habitually get these reports that provide assurance in abundance and countless elements of information that show us exactly the challenges that our social work professionals are presented with on a daily basis as they go to their work. And we should be tremendously grateful as the representatives of the people of Perth Kinross in this chamber that we are assured in this way. It's not inevitable, and we should be rightly very grateful for it. What Councillor Shires did mention was the requirement across social work professionals, as with every other professional that works in this council, to achieve more, usually against a backdrop of increasing demand, with less, usually in the context of challenging funding. And that's the reality that they face, and we're very, very lucky to have the approach that they take, which is not one of throwing their hands up in the air. It's one of rolling their sleeves up and delivering for this council and everybody who lives in this area, and we should be very grateful for that. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? Councillor Braun?
Thank you, Provost. My microphone is working. Just really wanted to add my commendation to the report. Social work obviously gets a lot of bad press, as we know. The report contains a lot of uplifting stories, and obviously it also points out the work that has yet to be done. As my colleagues know, I always like to try and throw in a quote if I can, at least to try and make myself look a bit intelligent for a while. And this one I think is very apt, if I may say it. To know that one life breathed a little easier because you were there, that's success. And I think that sums up this report, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you for that very appropriate remark. Councillor Rebek.
Thank you, Vice Provost, Deputy Provost, Willie.
Thank you, John. Carry on.
I think it is actually really important that the Lifelong Learning Committee do recognise the work of our social work department, specifically in the children's services part of that, but I'm sure it's equally true of the adult part of that. This is a superb report, and it's my experience since I've been elected that, as you allude to, that the ability to embrace change and collaborate with other bodies, whether that's within the council or without the council, is tantamount to the success of the social work department. And it's also my experience since I've been elected that all our officers in social work, whether it's the senior officers that are here today or officers generally, are genuinely dedicated. It is not just a job, it is a vocation, and I think it's really important that the Lifelong Learning Committee recognise that, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Provost. I just wanted to echo a lot of what Councillor Rebek has just said, and also to say that, you know, we appreciate the social workers have a very tough job. Every day when I hear stories in my community about the situations social workers are facing, and that at this festive time, as everyone keeps mentioning, we appreciate that you will be working over that festive time, including on Christmas Day and the rest of the holidays, in very difficult situations, and we are very grateful for your work, and this report is, you know, a commendation to you, the hard work that you do put in.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost.
Having met some of the staff and spoken to our Chief Social Work Officer on a number of occasions, I think the whole Council would reflect that complacency is not a word that we would associate either with, importantly, with her or her very dedicated staff. As others have said, this is an excellent report. There's one paragraph and one bullet point in particular that I wanted to comment on and not let pass without reflecting on, just drawing attention to it really. And that's at 2.4 of the report, and it's the first bullet point there. And I'm sure that the Chief Social Work Officer and our staff would not allow themselves the sin of pride, but to say that the report concludes that there are areas of good practice of national interest in the areas of kinship care, the support offered to children with disabilities and their families from Woodley, and the business model of the Child Protection Committee. For Perth Kinross to be in a leading position across the country, I think is something that we should reflect on and applaud the Chief Social Work Officer and all the social care staff for.
Thank you for that contribution and drawing particular attention to that. That was the type of point I was hoping that the media would pick up during the Christmas break. Are there any other questions? Okay. And the comments, we've had all the comments, I think. The comments. Okay. Can we agree the report? And I think, Jackie, could you maybe circulate the date of the conference? It'll be a Christmas present to us all to get that in our diaries if we can. It's been suggested that we have a very short break. Okay, is that agreeable? Yeah. 5 minutes, thank you. We're now on to item 11, a National Joint Review of Local Governance. And I just want to draw attention to the words local governance. It is local governance and not local government. There is a difference in, obviously, the two topics. Can I invite Fiona Robertson, Head of Culture and Public Service Reform, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillors, can you hear me? Great, thank you. The report in front of you is about taking the community empowerment agenda to the next stage through the principle of subsidiarity, which, as you all know, is about decisions being made at the most local possible level and where they will have most impact. Now, there are lots of different ways of doing that, and there are lots of different views about how it should be done, and officers are very grateful to the councillors who came along to the 3 workshops that we held in November and December to give us their views. Because we've been talking about this for a while, I won't introduce it at length. Better? Yep. Just to take you through the covering report, section 1.8 sets out some of the key considerations around the review, including the benefits and also the risks of subsidiarity and some of the implications for us and our organisational culture and how we work as a council in the future. Section 2.1 is a summary of the feedback points from the workshops which we held. Officers have tried to capture these as comprehensively as possible, but this is your submission. The appendix 3, is your submission, so if there are points that have been missed, very, very happy to hear those. And section 2.2 just flags up for you some of the wider considerations around this piece of policy work, including how public services may evolve and change as a result of how decisions about public services are made. Happy to take questions, Deputy Provost.
Thank you. Questions, first of all? Councillor Ling.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. Fiona, I'm sure you'll be very able at explaining this to somebody like myself, but it's 3.1, bullet point 2, start local with what can be aggregated upwards rather than what might be devolved downwards. Could you just give me an idea of what that means?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Lang. That was a view that emerged, I think, from all three of the workshops that we held. And I think the principle behind it, speaking for those who were there, was that, and I know you contributed to the first of those workshops from memory, was that actually perhaps the review was looking at things the wrong way round. It's not about devolving downwards, it's about thinking about what needs to happen at grassroots level to reach for a cliche and building upwards from that. The principle being that decisions that are taken at regional or national level should really be only those decisions that best support local decision making.
Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm on page 300, paragraph 2.3. There's the sentence, models in the Baltic states which have smaller, more responsive decision-making tiers should be re-examined. Do you mean Baltic there, or do you mean Scandinavian? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Parrott. Possibly I mean Scandinavian. I think this point emerged from you and a couple of others during the workshop, so happy to amend it.
I think it's Scandinavian. Thanks.
Councillor McDade.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. It's in just a quick query on sort of 1.3 in Appendix 3 of the draft response. I'm just quite happy with generally what it says about primary legislation should be a tool of last resort. I'm just wondering if we could make it a bit clearer that we're not in favour of regional council again.
Happy to put that in as one of the points, Councillor McDade. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Councillor Purves.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you, Fiona, for this paper. There's an awful lot in it with which I agree. There's just a couple of points that perhaps I could raise. Just following on from what others have said about the Regional Council. I agree with Councillor McDade's point on that. I'd also like to welcome the bit about the possibility of reviewing legislative framework for community councils. But I note that it says that community councils do not cover all geographies, so that there might be concern about giving them specified fiscal powers and responsibilities. I wonder if we could perhaps include something that says that actually there is an argument to say that if we give community councils defined fiscal responsibilities and powers, that this might act as an incentive to encourage more people to become community councillors, strengthen engagement in community council elections, and also it might get community councils that are not currently working and operating to come back into existence. I think it's a valid point to include. I'd also like to endorse the comments about the further review and reform of local taxation. And finally, in terms of the local action partnerships, I think that, yes, there's the point there that in terms of tackling inequalities, that there is certainly a role for them. I'm not sure I personally agree with it. There is a need for them to scrutinise and monitor and call to account public service bodies, but I think others perhaps might agree with that. But in terms of recognising that there are still some concerns about striking that balance with flexibility and governance, which officers have also mentioned, so it might be worth at least having a recognition that that is a view held by quite a number of elected members and other people outside this place. Thank you.
Thank you for those points, Councillor Purves. On community councils, I would say from experience that is absolutely right. I mean, the legislation around community councils is quite old now, and there are elements of it which were intended to be very permissive, but perhaps could be made clearer, and it might well be that that would stimulate them as a mechanism for devolved decision-making across Scotland. I think we also have to acknowledge, as I know you're well aware, that there are other local bodies which have emerged in the ensuing period. On your point about the balance of governance in LAPs, local action partnerships, maybe if you could just give me, I'm not sure I've quite captured all of that while scribbling away, so if you could just give me a form of words, we'll make sure that that goes into the final submission.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. It was just actually while you were answering Councillor Purves there, Mrs Robertson, there was a word you used which I reflected had come up in, I think, at least the workshop that I attended, which was permissive, and maybe it would be useful to include, I think you indicated that there was a general power from a 2003 Act about councils being empowered to do things for the well-being of their, whatever they're required to do for the well-being of their communities. I wondered if it would be useful to include a comment that any changes to local governance, including local government, should be permissive, and that it should be assumed that bodies can do things unless they're excluded, rather than the other way around.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Stewart, and we'll reflect that in the submission. The power to promote well-being or to enhance well-being, because I'm an ANARAC, is an interest about local government legislation, is an interesting one. It is a very permissive part of that Act. It has not been widely used, but there is scope for it to be used in combination with other existing legislative tools and any new ones that might come.
Are there any other questions? Councillor, yeah. Councillor Jarvis.
Yes, thank you. It's the fact that community councils don't necessarily cover all areas. Perhaps this should be beefed up a little bit in the report, that a mechanism, and I offer no suggestions, I'll leave that to other people to worry about, but a mechanism should be in place so that a group locally where there are no community councils could be identified and be given the same responsibilities that the community councils might be given. Thank you.
That sounds difficult, but Fiona, would you want to answer that, please?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Jarvis. The legislation that does exist around community councils places a duty on local authorities to have what's called a scheme of community councils in place, and for that to be reviewed as and when required, and we have carried out such reviews in Perth and Kinross over the years. It's not possible to give the same statutory roles and functions to community councils to another body, but it is possible to have an ecosystem, if you like, and we've got this in many parts of Perth and Kinross, where you've got different organisations who are fulfilling different functions on the ground, and the local action partnerships are intended to bridge some of that as well. But where there is a requirement to look at the geography of community councils and change what's called the scheme of how they operate across a local authority area, it's our duty to do that on a regular basis.
Do we have any more questions? Can we then proceed? And Councillor Lyle, would you like to move the paper, please? Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I know there is a strong commitment across this chamber to strengthening local democracy. There are challenges for all of us on this agenda, but we know that decisions taken with and not just for local people and our communities means that these will be better decisions. We have already made progress with our excellent track record in participatory budgeting and the new Community Investment Fund. This paper does not pretend to be a definitive approach to local governance reform, but it sets out the views and ideas from councillors across all parties in this council on how progress might be made. I look forward to seeing its conclusion sometime in the future. Happy to move the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. The review of local governance offers the opportunity for transformational change of governance in Scotland. Scotland is an outlier in terms of local democracy. At the review's heart is a recognition that more centralisation isn't the solution and isn't delivering the best outcomes for Scotland or its communities. The review is about how to improve representative and participative democracy through subsidiarity, decentralisation and competencies. It is about increasing participation through a variety of methods and looking at which methods of governance and engagement work best. It's about working across administrative boundaries between public sector bodies and their constituent parts, and between the public, private and third sectors. It's about local government and partners having the levers we need to be agile, to be able to respond rapidly in a permissive, enabled, autonomous environment, not hamstrung by central government caution and control. To that end, things like a general power of competence for local government are what is required, rather than a piecemeal or case-by-case devolution of individual powers and measures. In turn, we must support and encourage communities who want to take control of assets, who want to have a greater say in how budgets are spent, and for more local control over those budgets. COSLA, through its boards and its special interest group, have been engaging with councils to run workshops to capture local views on what works well, what needs to change, examples of best practice, to develop local government's asks of central government in the Local Democracy Bill. And COSLA has also been pressing hard that this should not be a review of local government. That was made absolutely clear when the joint terms of the review were launched, and that it was going to be a joint review. But it was also to cover the local governance environment, the scale and level or absence of local autonomy within public sector community partners, and engagement of private sectors needs to be part of that review. Greater fiscal and financial autonomy is a must. We need the responsibility for raising far more of our revenue, and we need the tools and autonomy to do that, and that way lies greater accountability. I've touched on functional empowerment previously. For me, this could be the last chance saloon for localism. We've had Christie, we've had the Commission for Strengthening Local Democracy, and we've had Calman and Smith commissions where warm words for local government flowed, but where powers stopped at Holyrood. We need a sea change. Thank you, Provost. Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Now, before I ask for any comments, I'd just like to check that I think Fiona Robertson was taking on board a point by Councillor Stewart, a point at least one by Councillor Purves, one by Councillor McDade, I think one from Councillor Parrott and one from Councillor Lang in answer to the questions. Have I got that correct? Okay, thank you. Are there any comments on the report? Can we agree the report as amended with the points made? Thank you. I'll hand you back to the Provost.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. It's item 12, Building Ambition, Developing Talent. I was to invite the Chief Executive to introduce the report.
Councillors, it's my long-held view that an organisation is only as good as its people. And since taking up post as Chief Executive in September, I have enjoyed meeting a whole range of staff across all service areas. I continue to be impressed with people's passion and commitment to their work, and I'm sure I speak for all of us in here today, expressing my appreciation for the positive difference our staff make to the lives of citizens and indeed communities of Perth and Kinross. There has never been a more important time to invest in our workforce, and it's vital that we continue to prepare our people for an emerging future. A growth mindset and opportunity focus will be critical to our ongoing success. After all, it is people who make change, innovation and transformation happen, and it is our people who will continue to make Perth and Kinross an area to live life well. I'm therefore delighted to submit to you today the annual workforce report, which outlines the broad range of workforce management and organisational development activity which took place over the course of 2018. Our positive people practices are designed to influence the cultural conditions which will enable staff to flourish and perform at their very best. So some highlights I would like to draw to your attention. Our Learn, Innovate, Grow organisational development framework sets out an ethos for thinking, working and future growth. And this framework has created an active focus on culture and engagement, which is particularly important in times of change. Learning is fundamental to our ability to grow as individuals and at an organisational level. And we have a vast community of active learners. Our approach capitalises on the diverse range of professional and technical expertise and experience which exists across the Council and our community planning partnership, and it is an extremely cost-effective way of supporting learning and development. There is a growing requirement for digital competency, and we have increased the range of opportunities available to staff to support people to develop their skills and confidence in this area. Our annual Angel Share Challenge actively encourages and celebrates entrepreneurial spirit across the Council, and earlier this month 6 projects were awarded seed corn funding to turn ideas into reality. And these included a corporate parenting kit, Seeds of Change from the REACH project, LGBTI Network, Walk Your Way to Better Strength, the terrific Trim Trail, and Balance Wheels to Go. Our annual employee survey, Appendix 2, continues to provide valuable insight into employee views. 11 out of the 17 questions showed an increase over the course of the last year of more than 1%. 3 had marginal increases of less than 1%, and 3 areas showed a very small decrease, and I'll just share with you what those areas were. In terms of at work, my views and opinions seem to count. I am given, and that decreased slightly by 1.6%. I am given freedom to solve problems, down 0.5%, and any problems that could stop me giving the best customer service are dealt with. That was down 0.1%. So clearly some areas for improvement. This year we invited respondents as part of our employee survey to provide qualitative context to their answers, resulting in a number of themes which will provide a focus for improvement in the coming year. And these are around leadership, workload and strategic direction. Job families have been implemented for 87% of the single status workforce, and job families aid workforce flexibility and help our people prepare for new roles where necessary. Over the last year, we've placed a focus on initiatives to enhance recruitment into teaching, early years and social care. We now have 22 different modern apprentice frameworks, an increase from 7 in 2012. And this year we exceeded our target, offering 400 modern apprenticeships opportunities during 2018. Employee health and well-being and resilience remains our priority, and we take a holistic approach to promote mental and physical health and financial well-being. In June, our Healthy Working Lives reaccreditation was awarded at silver levels. I'm sure we're ambitious to reach gold next year. Within NHS Tayside colleagues, we're working to develop a workforce plan for the Health and Social Care Partnership to identify future skill requirements and support greater integration of services. So looking ahead into 2019, the report also sets out the main areas of focus and redevelopment, to name but a few: redefining our approach to leadership development, reviewing our employment policy and practice framework, and redeveloping the range of support available to deliver change and transformation activity. Importantly, the high-level priorities set out in the report are all aligned with bringing to life the vision for the future contained within what will be the Perth Kinross offer. And this concept will be developed around Live Life Well, our ambition, and reinforce a Think Yes approach across the Council. The Perth Kinross offer will energise, create focus, drive our collective efforts, and fundamentally enable us to redefine the relationships we have with our citizens and our communities, so that we become increasingly effective at designing our work around people's needs and aspirations. I very much look forward to working with each and every one of you in developing our offer, and it's very clear to me that we start this next stage of the Council journey from a position of strength. We indeed have the privilege of being able to make a difference to the lives of so many people across our communities, and this report demonstrates the impact of investment in our workforce and our unwavering commitment to ensuring that people are fully supported to meet future challenges and indeed opportunities. Happy to take questions, Provost.
Thank you, Chief Executive. That was a very in-depth report. I'm sure you all agree. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, in Appendix 2, the very last page, it's page 334, one can't help but notice that the response rates by service, and this is across the board, apart from the Health and Social Care Partnership, which actually improved last year, but there's almost been a consistent decline. Even the Environment Service, where there is a very strong response rate, has declined somewhat. But across the board, it really is quite noticeable that there has been a fall in the responses. How can we improve that? And secondly, is just to give an assurance to the anonymous nature of the survey. Just to what extent do people fear that in responding, they're responding to in line with what their line managers want them to say?
Finished?
It's a question. It's just how do we improve that response rate?
Okay. I think Karen Donaldson, I think you're going to take that question.
Thank you for the question. I'd just like to reassure everybody here that the survey is entirely anonymous. The survey is actually technically supported by my own team, and we have no way of actually assessing who has said what, so I can offer that reassurance today. In terms of the response rates that we receive for the survey, we just have to be aware that people respond to what is important to them. We've been doing this survey for a number of years now, and it is only one of the engagement mechanisms that we deploy within the council. People choose to engage in different ways, and what we know is that actually there are so many other engagement opportunities for people that actually responding to the survey might not feel important to some people. What we also are aware of is that we are going to be reviewing the approach that we take to the survey as we go forward. We might be looking at different models of how we ask people, what their thoughts and feelings are. We might be reviewing the frequency, and we'll certainly be reviewing the technical capacity we have to do that. So everything that we are looking to do next year around employee voice will take into account the question you have about how we ensure that people are responding effectively and are actively wishing to take part in decisions which affect them.
Thank you. Chief Executive would like to respond to that as well.
Councillor Donaldson, thank you for your question. In line with what Sandra has explained, I think the other thing to provide assurance about is that I've currently been meeting with a number of staff and hosting what I'm calling learning lunches. What I can tell you is that our staff are not shy in making suggestions in terms of how we improve the working environment across Perth and Kinross. At the moment, I'm currently theming those into areas for improvement, but please be reassured that the survey is only one mechanism of catching people's views and encouraging people to be open and honest about their thoughts about how we improve the working environment across the council. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. My question relates to page 342 and 343 under the heading of Construction and Property Engineers. It states here that reducing the reliance on consultants and agency staff, well, consultants, they can look after themselves, but the agency staff, the issue there is if we are short of HGV drivers and HGV mechanics, can you see us actually having to move back to more reliance on agency staff, especially in HGV mechanics? Yes, we have a programme in modern apprenticeship to train people up, but that will take time. So do you see us having to revert back to agency staff to cover these jobs?
I think that would be Barbara that might take that one. Yeah. Does Karen want to do it?
I'm happy to start by way of a response to that question. I think we're trying to look ahead here and be prepared so that we can actually grow our own and look at continuing to invest. And we have done that in the past, and I'm not aware of any specific plans to move to more agency engagement for HGV staff. The idea would be that that would be a directly employed workforce, and hopefully with further investment be able to continue to grow our own.
I would just like to add to that. I think that Karen's got it, sort of right. We are aware, sort of HGV drivers in particular are a national issue. but the programme that we've got in terms of growing our own, and recruiting from within our own workforce and then keeping them with us, for a while, is there. We're embedding that, and hopefully it shouldn't be, a recurring problem into the future. But it will be difficult, and that's why we're identifying it in the workforce plan.
Do you envisage that the mechanics will be the same, that you will have enough mechanics coming to the system?
We have a proposal that we would, going through the process at the moment that we're hoping, will actually help us retain and recruit, to our mechanics.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much indeed, Provost, and thank you, Chief Executive, for a refreshing and positive report and introduction. I refer you to page 325, and I apologise to colleagues if this sounds a broken record, but you haven't had the pleasure of hearing this yet, Chief Executive. But I notice an omission on that page that in healthy working lives, there's no mention of active travel. Now, 2019, if I have anything to do with it, along with other colleagues, is going to be the year of active travel, where this council will be promoting a programme to access tens of millions, make a note of this, Stewart, tens of millions of pounds worth of sustrans funding to encourage active travel. And I hope that the council will be in the forefront of including that in everybody's working life, so that all members, councillors and officers, can be walking, can be cycling, can be running up and down the stairs and helping their healthy working lives. And as you know already, Provost, this is not an idle threat. There is plenty of evidence. You only have to look no further than Councillor Wilson, Councillor Robertson and myself to see the advantages, certainly for the elderly, of active travel. And I hope that we can roll this out across the council. So, although I may sound a little bit light-hearted, I think it's possibly an omission here. It's a free and easy way of making everybody's life healthier. And I think there's maybe room on the page 325 to include a little bit about it. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I didn't think we'd get a meeting without cycling being mentioned. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Provost. I welcome the Chief Executive's discussion and talk at the start about the Perth Kinross offer and Think Yes agenda, and I think that will help in terms of staff empowerment and might help the answers to questions 13 and 15, which were down this year. But my question is actually around question 3, which is about I receive regular praise recognition on my performance at work, which, although it's up 0.9%, is still the lowest at 63.7%. And I think that's quite a significant chunk of our staff, about 40%, that don't feel they're being recognised on a regular basis. And I'm wondering how we might resolve that going forward.
Who would like to take that one?
What happens whenever the survey results are released is that within services, they discuss the management teams in terms of the results, and then that's further discussed with staff. So everybody has an opportunity to talk about, okay, so what does this mean for us, what's important to us, and what do we want to change moving forward. So it's really important that everybody has a chance to contribute to that change. So those discussions are taking place just now. And obviously we're also looking at revamping the leadership approach. So we will be looking at that element of leadership as we go forward into 2018.
Chief Executive would like to say something as well.
Thank you, Provost. In line with the Perth and Kinross offer, Councillor McDade, councillors, there is the potential for us to look at the psychological contract that exists between the employee and the employer, and how we actually create an environment where people feel that actually they are rewarded and recognised and valued for the contribution that they make. So in the spirit of Think Yes empowerment, I think that's a conversation we need to have with our colleagues across the council.
Okay. Right, Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. I'm referring to page 336 on the report with workforce challenges and opportunities. Whilst I understand that there is a national problem regarding teachers, especially in English, home economics, Gaelic STEM subjects, etc., as mentioned in the report, I'm just wondering if I could have some clarity on the word difficulty, along the lines of, do we have vacancies at the moment, and if so, how long is it taking to fill them?
Sheena, would you like to take that?
We do have vacancies at present. The average time taken to fill
varies depending on the time of year. What we actually tend to find is that there'll be more applicants likely to come in after a Christmas and New Year break in terms of people looking for a move at that point, Councillor McCall. The exact number of vacancies that we have in the different subject areas, I don't have that information with me today, but I can provide that for you.
Thank you, and I'll take one more, and that's Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Provost. I'm on the page 331 and 333 of the Employment Engagement Survey. To me, questions 1, 12 and 13 are some of the most important there. People are clear of what is expected of them. They know how their job contributes to the Council's wider objectives, and they understand the freedoms they have to solve problems. Slightly more worrying, though, is question 15. Any problems that could stop me giving the best customer service are dealt with, which scores quite lowly. And I would ask whether attention might be given to that. Is it a question that people perceive problems, or are there actually sometimes necessary constraints on the freedom of action that staff members have, which they don't fully understand? Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you for your question, Councillor Parrott. I think there's real scope here in terms of looking at how we work with colleagues across the organisation, and many councillors will have heard me talk about Think Yes, in terms of how do we create the environments where our colleagues flourish, and indeed decision making is made at the right level by the right people with the right frameworks in place. So I think that will go a long way in terms of answering the question that you pose. I do think there is a need for us to also focus on how we enhance the customer experience, and whether that customer experiences our citizens, or whether it's colleagues across the councils, or the relationship between elected members and officers. I think there's a huge range of opportunities for us to enhance that particular issue. Thank you.
Scott. Right, is there no more questions? I said that would be the last one, by the way. Councillor Lyle, can I ask you to move the report?
Thank you, Provost. It's become an annual tradition each December to take a look back over the key achievements in workforce management and organisational development over the previous 12 months. Also to set out our priorities for the forthcoming year. This year's annual workforce report provides councils with case studies and examples of our investment in people, and set out the corporate workforce plan, which was approved in February 18. The pace and extent of change in public services remains significant, and our ability to deliver vital services to our communities in these challenging times is largely dependent on our people. For many years, we have been preparing our organisation, our employees, for an uncertain future by creating the cultural conditions for a resilient and agile workforce equipped with the necessary skills and behaviour for the challenges ahead. Our achievements are characterised by the experiences of employees and the outcomes achieved across the organisation. This story is brought to life through examples of personal stories from employees and managers who are at the front line of delivering services and transforming our public sector services. Excuse me. The world of work will continue to evolve, and the role of the Council will evolve too in our ever-changing, often unpredictable future. Our people are critical to our ability to adapt and transform in anticipation of the changing view of public services. Our changing relationship with communities as we continue to develop our Perth Kinross. A key strength of our organisational culture is our ongoing commitment to visibly acknowledging reorganising the achievements of individuals and the collective efforts of our teams across the Council. Therefore, it gives me great pleasure today to publicly acknowledge the effort and achievements of our employees. It is the people who make a difference, the people who make things happen, and the people who change other people's lives. I am proud of our collective achievements to date and of our continued investment in our workforce. Perth Kinross Council continues to be regarded as sector leading in many areas, and our commitment and ambition to learn, innovate and grow will stand us in good stead. It is my pleasure to move the report today, and hope that you will join me in passing on our thanks for the dedication, commitment and talent shown by all of our employees every day in their working lives across this Council. Pleasure to move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. I believe that creating a can-do, will-do environment, empowering frontline staff to just do it, will work wonders for the well-being of staff, their levels of job satisfaction and self-worth. It's something that I've tried to help foster in housing and communities through things like the personalised budgets to prevent homelessness at the front line, the initiative that we introduced at the start of this year. And it's evidenced in the empowered, flexible approach of our welfare rights team in their proactive initiative for better use and targeting of welfare funding from the Council's charitable trust to support the people that really need it and people in crisis. The work being done to become a more inclusive employer with a more inclusive workplace is to be commended, with particular regard to the establishment of the LGBT+ staff network and the proactive work to provide assurance and advice to EU and EAA nationals with the Ethnic Minority Law Centre on the UK settlement scheme. Innovation and talent spotting, developing leadership and greater diversity in our workforce, making use of technology and developing the digital skills to utilise new technologies, including mobile technology, are all key components of our approach. Many of the examples in the annual workforce report demonstrate the emphasis that this council places on growing its own and future talent and reskilling and reshaping its workforce as it adapts to changes in how and who delivers services. There's a constant theme of enthusiasm to embrace change and of job satisfaction and achievement, which augurs well for the future. And Provost, I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Provost. I think it's worth noting that my experience in Lifelong Learning Committee is that a lot, maybe most, teacher vacancies are due for the admirable reason of career advancement, and often internal PKC career advancement at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. I saw another hand up there. Councillor Ling.
Thanks, Provost. I think this will be the 6th time I've been here and seen the employment engagement survey, and I'll raise the same point again that Councillor Donaldson said, and maybe the Chief Executive could really push this out, is that the staff that I meet as well do not believe in the anonymity of it, and that's why it's falling off. They do feel they can be traced, although I've had assurances every year. But don't try and convince me, try and convince the people who are answering the question, I think would be the one point. And it is a very positive report, and that, but every response and every quote in here is a positive response. There's no negativity as well, and I think to give a balanced approach, we could maybe have something in there that where we're saying, somebody said we could do something different or better. Thanks.
Councillor Purves.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to add my endorsement to this report, and in particular to echo some of the comments that have been made about the Think Yes agenda. I think in many cases there are things that in this council and in other public sector organisations that take an awful long time to happen, or indeed don't happen at all. And that's not because of a lack of resource, a lack of skills, or a lack of expertise, but sometimes that we get tied in knots around policies. Now, policies are important, but there is often a case for delegating authority to the employees who are at the coalface. Now, that will, yes, require a different form of governance, and we need to be conscious of that. But I would just like to endorse the suggestion of moving towards a Think Yes agenda, and echo the comments that have been made about the significant improvements that this could have for both staff and our customers, the taxpayers, in terms of their satisfaction with the council. As far as I'm concerned, it's a win-win situation.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Provost. It's to maybe just develop Councillor Purves' point in one particular direction. If I drew members' attention to section 2.3 of the report and paragraph C about agreeing defined leadership approaches which support further the development of the Think Yes environment, leadership at all levels and new ways of working with our communities. I thought that the commitment here in the priorities outlined in the report to developing new ways of working with our communities was key, and I just wanted to reflect my thanks to Director Renton from the Housing and Environment Service and her Deputy Director Keith McNamara for the very positive and engaged way that I know that they are working on, looking at developing the relationship between council staff and improving consultation, engagement and information channels. Mr McNamara was kind enough to give me foresight of a policy for successful engagement, and I look forward to that bearing fruit in the future.
Thank you, Councillors. Councillor Dugan, please.
Many thanks, Provost, and I just want to assure in the beginning that Councillor Purves, that all of us over here on this side of the chamber are all very pro-yes, and I'm delighted to welcome him into the tent. I can give him some badges if he'd like. To return to the report, which is very positive, and I'm very grateful to see that and digest the information. It's a comprehensive a view of how we value and treat and develop our staff, and it's much to be welcomed. I would echo some of the sentiments that Councillor Lane has said about the drop-off, and Councillor Donaldson about the drop-off in returns of the questionnaire, and I think I'm totally assured that it's confidential. I've got no doubt about that, but of course people's realities, if they don't believe that, then there's a job of work to do there. But I just simply wanted to alight on page 319, the graphic that shows some of the key changes that's happening within the shape of our workforce, and welcome very positively the increase in employees under 24. It's a key priority of an employer of our size in Perth and Kinross to provide employment opportunities, crucially that include career advancement opportunities to our young talented people, so that they may stay here and raise a family here and spend their income here, and also that the number of employees over 60 has risen. My one caution about that, and it's my fault for not asking the question, but I'll speak to Karen Donaldson later about the increase in over 60s, is I'm concerned that some of those people, if they're female, may not wish to be here after 60, but they find that they have to due to recent changes in their pension situation. And also, I hope very much that the increase in staff turnover can be detailed as a positive also. Quite often it could be a negative, but hopefully a positive. But overall, a very, very welcome report and health check on our workforce. Provost, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dugan. Do we agree the report? Yep. And item 13, Equalities Performance Report. Can I ask the Deputy Chief Executive to introduce the report?
Thank you, Provost. This report provides members with an overview of our equalities work as an employer and service provider, demonstrating our commitment to equality of opportunity and how our equality outcomes have been achieved. This is the first such equalities performance report and establishes a benchmark for us for future years, and will become an established part of the performance reporting cycle. The report clearly lays out why equality is at the heart of what we do, as all services demonstrate how much equality is part of the mainstream day-to-day work detailed in full in Appendix 1. I would make specific mention of a number of highlights within the report itself during the past year. We have increased the level of information available online to speakers of other languages. We have a digital inclusion services for our council tenants, and we're beginning to see the impact of pupil equity funding in schools. We have a range of multicultural events which a number of local elected members will have been able to attend. We have our sector-leading programme of Show Racism the Red Card schools workshops, which recently celebrated a decade of work in this area. And our LGBT History Month programme last February was the leading one in Scotland. These are just a few examples of an extensive range of work undertaken across the council in relation to equalities. We are also an employer which takes equalities seriously, and Appendix 2 provides our annual statutory equality and diversity in employment report. David McPhee, as our lead officer, has done sterling work in promoting equalities across the council, and he and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any questions on the report? No. Can I ask Councillor Lyle to move the report?
Thank you, Provost. This report provides members with the first specific Equalities Performance Report, highlighting the range of work undertaken across this Council, both directly and in partnership, to meet our statutory equality outcomes. This report provides firm evidence of our commitment to making Perth Kinross an accessible, inclusive, safe and welcoming place. It also provides evidence of our commitment to filling our equality obligations as an employer. I would like to particularly thank Councillor Barrett for visibly championing this area of work, and I commend the report to members. Please also note that this report will go to the Scrutiny Committee shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. I'm very happy to second this Equalities Performance Report and this Council's commitment to have progress reported on an annual basis. The outcomes that we as a Council are seeking to achieve are that services are accessible in the broadest sense possible, that we provide an equal opportunities workplace where all employees can reach their full potential, and that there will be inclusive opportunities for communities to take part in and influence Council decisions. And fourthly, that there will be opportunities for all individuals and community groups to be involved in inclusive community activities and events in our area in a safe and welcoming environment. As examples of the latter, I recently attended the Chinese Community Christmas Lunch. I've also attended a sign language haunted, oblique, horrible tour of Perth for people who are deaf and had learning and or physical disabilities. It was a great night, as was the Christmas light switch on, where an elevated platform and ramped access to view the show and the fireworks was provided at the entrance of St Matthew's Church. Funding towards that access was, if I recall correctly, provided by Perth Common Good Fund, so it is tremendous to see local residents enjoying the benefits as a return on that investment. As part of the Multicultural Events Programme, the Vice Convener of the Housing and Communities Committee has attended the late Eid and Diwali celebrations. I have also attended the Torchlit Parade and Christmas carols in the city centre. As Jim Valentine said, Perth and Kinross Council were the top performing council in Scotland during LGBT History Month, with a programme that met every criteria last February, and which we intend to build on further for next year. And I'm also very grateful to the Perth Common Good Fund for its decision today to provide financial support for LGBT History Month and those events for next year as well. I also look forward to the Deputy Provost leading the Perthshire Pride March that we're intending to have next year too, with the same sort of energy that he brought to the Perth Pride launch in August. We've spoken about the establishment of an LGBT+ network and staff champions. Our Equality Strategic Forum brings together a wide spectrum of minority and advocacy and third sector groups. Our Gypsy Traveller strategy has been renewed. Our Gypsy Traveller sites meet and exceed all the minimum standards set by the Scottish Government. And we are leading Scottish local authorities with East Ayrshire Council in piloting a negotiated stopping approach to managing temporary encampments as part of the revised strategy. We hosted the annual Wellbeing Mila organised by the Gypsy Traveller community only last month, and we also hosted a COSLA event to generate more interest in the negotiated stopping pilot next year. Provost, from what I've already mentioned and things like the proactive and responsive work that Show Races and the Red Card are doing in an area and in our schools, and the visible support that you yourself have provided to the 16 Days of Action Against Violence Against Women and the Reclaim the Streets March, there are many highly visible markers and milestones that Perth and Kinross is becoming a fairer, more inclusive city and region, and more tolerant, more equal and more cohesive. And I want to thank everyone who has played and continues to play a role in that. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments on the report? No, agree the report? Thank you. Item 14, Planning Policy Practice and Improvement Member Officer Working Group, Remit. Can I invite Barbara Renton, Executive Director, to introduce the report?
Thank you, Provost. This report reflects the views from the Member Officer Working Group itself in terms of amendments to the group's name and remit. Improvement has been added to the title of the group, and it's also added to the remit, as can be seen with the last bullet point in paragraph 2.2. There's also an addition to the remit in terms of the first bullet point in the same paragraph in terms of the implications of the proposals contained in the planning bill.
The other significant change is the recommendation of adding a fourth opposition member to provide balance within the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Are there any questions of the report? Councillor Lyle, could you move the report?
Thank you, Provost. The report outlines the remit of the refreshed Planning, Policy, Practice and Improvement Member Officer Working Group, which will provide a forum to discuss the opportunities and challenges around this vitally important and often contentious statutory service that the Council performs. A properly functioning planning system is vital in supporting sustainable economic growth while ensuring the aspirations and concerns of our communities are given proper consideration. Perth Kinross Council is recognised nationally as one of the best performing planning authorities, recently receiving a Scottish Award for Quality in Planning for partnership working at Bertha Park Village. The refreshed MOG remit recognises that elected members, officers, national agencies, developers and communities all have a role to play in ensuring that Perth Kinross continues to be appropriately planned and developed. The MOG will provide an important forum to reflect and discuss a wide range of views with the clear objective of continuous improvement. As a former convener of the local review body, I am very much aware of the challenges and opportunities around land use planning and the important role that this MOG will play, both in supporting members and officers going forward. I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor McCall, you're seconding the motion.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, you'll be glad to know I won't say very much. I just am happy to second this report. I've often believed that working together in a sensible manner is the best way to move forward. And I'm really pleased that we're going forward with this MOG, with the continuous improvement and that being highlighted within the report. And I am happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any comments on the report? Do we agree with the report? Did you have a question?
No, it was just for clarity that the fourth member of the opposition group will be Councillor Barnacle.
All right. Okay. Is that what you're on about? Okay. Thank you. Item 15, appointments to committees, partnership groups, outside bodies. Can we agree the appointments are set out on the agenda? In addition, can we also agree that Councillor John Duff replace Councillor Coates on the Lifelong Learning Committee? And on item 16, can we agree that... Oh, you've got a question, Councillor Barrett.
Can I ask a question relating to item 16?
I'm not there yet.
Okay, sorry.
I was in the middle of it when you stopped me. Item 16, updates to scheme administration. Can we agree the updates are set out in the agenda? Councillor Barrett.
This may reflect my lack of knowledge of the English language, but can I just clarify what comprising 5 members of the council who are members of the committee and 3 non-council members when considering educational matters means? Does it mean that when the committees, the executive subcommittees not considering educational matters, it might be constituted differently? Or does it mean that the 3 non-council members are only present when the executive subcommittee is considering educational matters? Thank you.
I think I'll take some advice on that.
Since it's part of our scheme of administration, I think it's probably fair that it should be clear.
I'll try and clarify that. Within the legislation, it prescribes that the non-council members can only deal with educational matters. So that's things like the religious threats. So that's just confirming that that doesn't extend their remit beyond what they're statutorily entitled to do just by virtue of it being the subcommittee.
That explains it perfectly. Thank you.
I'm very, very glad she was here. Thank you very much. Can I? Councillor Purves.
Sorry, can I just ask for further clarification on the same point? Given that we have non-council members for other organisations, not just the 3 religious representatives who are voting. We now have youth representatives, we also have staff representatives. I don't know what the case is in terms of the committee, how that's worded, but perhaps it might be worth, I presume that's the 3 religious reps, or is it not?
Any of the 3 non-council members.
But a religious representative would have voting rights, whereas the others wouldn't.
On educational matters. On educational matters only.
Okay, but so there's no, we're not specifying it's one religious rep, because clearly that would affect the balance of the committee and the number of people who can vote. No? Okay.
Are there any further questions? No? Can I take this opportunity to wishing you all a very, very happy Christmas and a good year when it comes.